Hi and welcome. If you're the type of business owner or investor that gives themselves a hard time, you've got a lot of negative self-talk, you criticize yourself, beat yourself up, feel shame or guilt, you're going to want to watch this week's show. It should be enlightening and very freeing for you. See you on the inside. This morning I worked with a business client of mine. She is an amazing human being, really big-hearted. She has an amazing mission for her business. Just an incredible person, a very warm person. And she's come to me, she's a client of ours, and we're helping her to build her business, to scale it so that she's got way more profit and a lot more free time, which is something that we specialize in. But we do something a bit different to a lot of other business coaching organizations. We work very closely with our business owners, right down into the depths of their psyches. Why? Well, you can't separate how a business owner thinks, what they believe, or their emotional dispositions from how they run their business. You can give them all the great strategies in the world, which we do, but unless this thing's cleaned up, meaning the body mind, their personal consciousness, they will not be impactful and they will not implement those strategies effectively. The mind is important. In talking to my client this morning, one of the things that I quickly picked up is that she has a part of her personality that beats herself up, that gives her a hard time. And I'm sure some of you watching this will recognize this in yourself. It's almost like she's got this part of her that constantly watches her and judges her for the areas that she fails up to live to this concept of perfection. And this part especially could look back on her past and see all sorts of things that she did not do right, and see all sorts of things where she perceived she had failed or had done the wrong thing. And hindsight's wonderful like that, isn't it? We can see the mistakes that we have made. But in seeing those mistakes, as I said, there's just a beating up of self. The part of the personality involved in this is often what we might call the judge, or it could be the inner critic, and we may dig into these as we move into this show. You know, as I said before, the judge is there. Well, you didn't do this properly and you failed there and you hurt this person and that stuffed up. You should have done better. So let's just start with, well, why would we want to address that? Why would we want to do something about that if we were business owners with those patterns? Well, first of all, there's a key principle involved. And the first principle is that the more shame and guilt a person has, the less deservability they have. So you kind of understand this. So conceptually, if you experience, or experientially, from an experience perspective, if you are giving yourself a hard time, beating yourself up, running yourself down, that's an aggressor part of the personality. As I said, the inner critic, the judge, maybe. There could be some other sub-personalities involved. Sub-personalities are different parts that make up the psyche. And as they beat you up, it's also going to trigger another part of your personal consciousness, and we can say this for all human beings. It will trigger, unless they're psychopathic, for any normal human being, that beating oneself up will trigger low self-worth. And the sense of, see, I'm no good, I'm not good enough, and maybe I should be doubting myself. So I'm no good. So the moment that you've got, I'm no good, you know, I could have done better. And the other part saying, look, you see, you're no good. You're hopeless. You should have done that better. I'm not going to forgive you. I'm going to give you a hard time. That's all what we call punishment energy. So they're punishment emotions. You're punishing yourself. It's almost like you've got these two beings in you. This is just a good way of saying it. The punisher, and then there's a part of you that goes, yeah, see, I am no good, I am hopeless. Okay? Now, if you've got the I'm no good, I'm hopeless, you'll feel like you don't deserve. This is what I said about this sets up low deservability. And the punishing parts are also saying you don't deserve. Now, this is archetypal. Okay? Archetypal. Let me explain that. So, regardless of culture, regardless of time, you will punish yourself or feel less than if you don't agree with the value structures of your hierarchy. Now, what do I mean by your hierarchy? Okay, so if you grow up in a family and your family teach you to be, don't cry, don't show any emotions, be tough, keep away from emotions. If you show emotions like you're crying, it'll make your entire family uncomfortable, and you'll pick up quickly, well, geez, there's something wrong with me if I cry. People reject me if I cry. So what that sets up, of course, is this idea of perfection. This is how I'm supposed to be as a person, and each family unit will have their idea of perfection. And not on each family unit, each school you go to will have their idea of perfection. Each social tribe will have their idea of perfection. Your culture will have an idea of perfection. The entire society, the entire world has these ideas and models of perfection that change over time and change between tribes, change between social structures, and change between families. Okay, so first of all, they're not truths, they're givens. Okay, so as an example, I always like to think of this as Ragnar from the show The Vikings. Okay, all the women loved Ragnar because he was the most violent of warriors. He would go in and take his Vikings in and rape and pillage the local villages and bring back all the jewelry and gold and what have you. And they all looked at him as a hero. He was the man to be. So obviously that became a hierarchical structure that man wanted to live up to. And if you weren't that, you might give yourself a hard time. If you're a coward or scared or weren't aggressive, you'd give yourself a hard time. Now, of course, in these days, Ragnar would be looked at as a beast. The woman wouldn't like him. They'd be appalled by his behavior because value systems of hierarchies come about with what's required to survive. And back then, different behaviors were rewarded because those behaviors helped us survive. Let's keep away from that. You can see I've got a grand interest in these types of things. Human behavior, where it's come from, what the reasons are for it. So with this, bring it back to the client this morning. So here she is. She's got these models of perfection. She looks back at her past and she can see all these things that she, based on her perceptions, has failed at based on her models of perfection. And she's beating herself up, which lowers her sense of deservability. This is where I need to go. If you've got a lowered sense of deservability, what will happen is unconsciously you will not reward yourself. You will push away things that will reward you because, as I said before, it's archetypal. And if you are good, look at all reward structures are based on you being good and complying to the values of the hierarchy. Now, let's just use some basic examples here. If you grew up in the West in a Christian-based culture, you learnt that Father Christmas will bring you presents if you are a good boy or a good girl. And when you're out with mummy or daddy, and if you be quiet and you toe the line and you're a good boy or a good girl, you'll get a treat. You'll get an ice cream. And let's just take this even further. If you go to school, you get rewarded with good marks if you do the things that please the teachers and pass the exams. And the opposite is true. If you are a bad boy or a bad girl, Father Christmas is not going to deliver any presents. You're not going to get any Easter eggs from the Easter Bunny. And then we can extend this into human beings' projections into religion. If you are a good boy or a good girl, you get rewarded in whatever your religion's version of heaven is. And if you've been a bad boy or a bad girl, you will get punished in your religion's version of hell. So it's a archetypal process to be rewarded for doing good and being right, and punished for being bad and wrong. So people carry that around in their unconscious as a model, a map of meaning. And if you've got, as what we're talking about today with these parts, the inner critic, the judge, the inner punisher beating you up, and then that will trigger your low self-worth and shame. See, I am no good. That will set up on the unconscious level choosing. Well, it depowers you, and you won't realize it, but you'll be choosing on an unconscious level not to take up opportunities or to undermine opportunities that would benefit you, because your basic unconscious pattern, if you're beating yourself up all the time, was, I don't deserve that. I don't deserve that. And that will demote your enthusiasm for going out there and getting the big reward. You are downgrading your energy. So the opposite is of someone that really, really likes themselves, and this is not egoically. Okay, egoically is an arrogance. Arrogance always is based on its opposite, by the way. So someone that's arrogant is hiding from their low self-worth. And let me explain this. If you're walking around looking up at people, well, they're amazing. Well, then you're looking up, which means you're putting yourself down. And then if that's who you are, you also play the opposite game, which is, look, I am better than them. I am above them. Look, they're worse than me. That's all ego, and that's what most people do. Okay? When you like yourself, you are just okay with who you are. You understand your inherent goodness. Even if you make mistakes, you understand you're doing the best you can. You feel good about who you are, even though you're not perfect. Okay, so that's a sense of liking self. If you like self in the unegoic manner, what you do is you naturally want what's good for you and good for the people around you. You'll naturally go for what's good for you. You believe you deserve it. Okay, so you can probably start to get this. Now, I work with clients day in and day out. I'm telling you that these patterns will run a person's brain, how they think, or how they perceive opportunities or don't perceive the opportunities. So if you've got an inner punisher, low level of deservability, your brain won't even see the thing that could really reward you, because it's wired not to, based on the unconscious pattern of low deservability. Where if you are you like yourself and you have high deservability, you naturally look for and seek out, and you will see the opportunities that reward you. I can't speak more highly of the unconscious belief system's ability to control what the brain sees. And this is what we call the reticular activating system, where we tend to see what aligns with our belief systems. We've got so much data coming at us that our brains can't take it all in. So something must be the organizing principle for what we allow in. And our belief structures will do that by controlling the reticular activating system. Another psychological component involved with that is confirmation bias, which is we tend to see things that agree with our belief systems. So I want to take this a little bit further to give you greater context to this. If you are the person that gives yourself a hard time, beats yourself up, and then feels worse than. If you are a human being that is evolving lots in your life, what happens is you can only ever look back at the past and see massive mistakes. You can only see massive mistakes, okay? Or small mistakes, but you'll just see mistakes. So as an example for me, I would say I've evolved a lot in my life. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, so who I was is no longer who I am. And I can say that in a multitude of ways. I can see a multitude of ways that I am not who I was. And in many ways, I'm a superior version of myself. And what I mean by superior, it means that I get better results than I used to get. I don't suffer in the same way as I used to suffer because I've changed the patterns that created that suffering. My relationships are amazing. My primary relationships in my family, especially my relationship with my wife, is incredible because I've evolved past old patterns that kept me separate from her, patterns that made me less efficient or effective as a father, less efficient and as effective as a business person, as an investor. All those areas of life have improved for me because I was willing to address the patterns that were creating the experiences and results I had back then. So, of course, if you were evolving lots, you look back at yourself 2 years ago and you think, oh my God, wow, I can't believe that I was like that. Wow, look at that. Look at the mistakes I made. Because when you evolve, you're evolving towards deeper levels of your own perceived perfection for self based on who you want to be and where you want to go, based on your moral code and hopefully your heart. And so you're moving past all these past behaviors that were more destructive, weren't as efficient. So looking back, you go, oh, look at that. I was terrible. Look at this. Look at that. So it's easier almost to beat yourself up if you are a person who is wanting to evolve and grow, and you are evolving and growing because you constantly look back and you can see, oh, I made all those mistakes. But if you look at this, back then you didn't know you were making those mistakes. It's only because you're an evolving human being that allows you to see that you made those mistakes, or they were even mistakes. There's heaps of people who spend years and years living out these dysfunctional behaviors in business or in their relationships, and they don't even want to see that they're making mistakes. That it's too hard on their ego, so they want to cover that up and feel right. People that evolve are questioning themselves, double-checking their motives, double-checking their behaviors, and they've got models of how they would prefer to behave. So the reason I'm sharing this is that oftentimes people that are really interested in evolving and upgrading themselves as human beings are the ones that are the hardest on themselves, because they really have models that they're aspiring to or they have reached, and then they look back on the past and they go, oh no, I can't believe I was like that. Okay, really important. So working with this client this morning, another thing came apparent, more so when I left the call with her, which I ran on Zoom. And that is this. I'm just going to talk about my own life for a second to put this in context. Oftentimes people that have had hard lives, very challenging lives, they tend to grow and evolve the most. Not always, but fairly often. And so, well, I'm going to find a better way of sharing this. So when I was young, because of what I experienced growing up, the misuse of power, I was a very, very angry human being and a very violent human being. And so violence and anger wasn't all I was, but there was a fair proportion of my personal consciousness, especially the personal consciousness that sort of lived from a day-to-day basis, because we only understand a percentage of our personal consciousness in reality. And so I was always in fights. I wouldn't let people close to me. I didn't trust anyone because my underlying belief system was if people that love me do that to me, what does that mean about everybody else? right? You just can't trust anyone. And then with the anger, and because of where I grew up, you had to fight, overlay of violence. And by the time I was 17, I think it was, remember rightly, I was in like Borstal for violent offending, and I had to go to group training with all these big Maori gang members, and that was me. That's who I was. I did a whole bunch of horrible things. Horrible how I was as a result of that. Okay? And I used to beat myself up for that. Give myself a hard time. Where I'm going with this and what I want to share with you is who I was is the reason for who I am today. Therefore, all those past supposedly horrible things that I did or was helped me evolve because I used those things wisely. At the time, and it's the same for everybody that's listening and watching this, you didn't mean to be anything other than what you were. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you were nothing more than a reflection of your genetics, nothing more than a reflection of your conditioning that helped shape you. And that's what you lived out. So if I look back on the past, once I got over the beating myself up through some of the concepts I'm sharing with you here, understanding this, I got to realize something, and this is what I'm going to share with you now. So all that violence, first of all, I want to say this. As I said, if you've come from a hard upbringing, it will have created some behavioral patterns and would have given you some life experiences that would have shaped you, your behaviors, in a way that sort of helped you survive. But in another way, they'll be sabotaging your life. So as an example, as I said, my violence helped me survive where I grew up. It helped me have power in an area where there was more of a warrior consciousness, which means I had to fight. So why not be a good fighter or have access to a lot of rage so you can fight? Okay, that makes you powerful. And as I said before, because of my upbringing, because of that, couldn't trust him. I'd keep everyone away. So what allowed me to survive, which was based on my belief systems, not get betrayed, so I don't get into any intimate relationships with the feminine. And this violence has helped me navigate this masculine world where people do fight me and will fight me. That helped me survive, but I couldn't have good relationships. And I got to the point where I was sick of fighting. I found fighting horrible. Part of me loved it, by the way. Part of me didn't. So in having these experiences from the past of violence, of being beat up, of beating someone up, of not having good quality intimate relationships, I did that. I did it to death, so I know what that is like. And because I know what that is like, I can now make a decision. Well, I don't want to be like this. I don't want to have this anymore. So I can start to work on myself. And as I start to work on myself, I start to evolve and I start trialing new behaviors and embedding new behaviors into my brain, rewiring the way my brain works. And so therefore, all the horrible things I actually experienced as a person and the horrible things I became as a person have informed my evolution. Let's take this a little bit further. At the same time, I am now able, and I was able, don't do this work anymore, but by the time I never put my hand up saying, hey, I want to do this work, people used to come and talk to me. They'd come and talk to me. They'd tell me their problems and they'd leave with some insight. And then they'd tell their friends and someone else would come and want to. That's how I ended up in business, by the way, because people wanted to come and talk to me. So after I cleaned up my own act more and more and more, I wasn't judgmental of people that were violent. I understood why people were violent. I was okay with violence, meaning I could handle violent people because I knew what it was to be violent. I knew why I was violent. I had compassion for myself. It wasn't my fault I was violent, it's what I grew up with. Okay, that doesn't mean I didn't take responsibility for it, but that only happened when I started waking up. Well, I don't want to be like this anymore. And therefore, if someone turns up, which happened because I ended up working with a lot of thugs, street people, SAS soldiers that were traumatized, they'd turn up and I'd be like, oh, I'm fine with you. No judgment. You don't mean to be the way you are. I now know you want to do something about it. Let's go do something about it. So when you understand that when all your past mistakes, when you've learned from those past mistakes, you will evolve. And this is why I said before, people that have hard upbringings that tend to make more mistakes will tend to evolve more if they use that wisely. So, really important to understand that the inner work required to shift the disposition from the self-punishment, from the inner critic, to forgiveness of self and developing compassion for oneself and what you've learned and how you've grown and how you've evolved as a result of being that horrible thing or making those terrible mistakes. It puts it in a completely different context. And in some ways, by the way, this is the awakening of the heart. So the more you accept self and can be okay with self, regardless of who you are and what's showing up for you, the better you are with other people, the less judgmental you are with other people, the more open-hearted you are in life. Really important to share that with you. So I hope that helps some of you business owners or investors that give yourself a hard time for things you've done in the past, mistakes that you have made. It's just part of the evolutionary process. Those mistakes give you broad experiences, allow you to grow, evolve, and also give you far greater compassion for other people that are struggling and in challenge. By the way, someone that's had a life where they haven't made a lot of mistakes, haven't been challenged a lot, well, oftentimes they're boring people. Okay, they're boring, and they don't evolve lots because they haven't had a lot to evolve past. And that's probably why they're boring. I don't mean that meanly, but they just haven't had expanded lives with lots of different experiences. I hope you get a lot from it. It was more about emotions and belief systems, but enjoyed sharing this with you. If you're interested, come and do a free strategy session with me. Yes, we'll be talking about business, unblocking your business and getting your business flying. You might want to talk to me about some of the behavioral and emotional issues that are getting in the way of you achieving what you want to achieve in business. I'm equally adept at working with that as well, or giving you best-in-class strategies to grow a business as a leader, putting teams in place so that your team grow your business for you, because my end desire for my clients is to make way more profit, have way more free time so that they can spend time with their families and doing the things that they love. See you next time. Catch ya.